Today is called Shabbat Chazon, named after the Haftarah. Chazon Yeshayahu was just read, and you heard the mournful tone of the Haftarah, which reminds us of the reading of the book of Eicha and the fast of Tisha B'Av, which begins tonight. The fast begins 5 minutes to 9. And then we're gathering for our Mariv service here at 10 p.m. I know it's a bit late, but you can eat until 8:55. That's the good news. And we're going to daven evening service and read Megillat Eicha tonight. The fast of Tisha B'Av, according to our sages, is a day set aside for weeping and mourning since the time of the Bible, a day of terrible tragedies that occurred in Jewish history. Among them, according to the Talmud in Tractate Tanit, the destruction of both the first and second temples in Jerusalem. We know a little bit about the destruction of the first temple, but we know a lot more about the destruction of the second temple in the year 70 CE. At the time of the second temple's destruction, who was the most important Jew alive? In the year 70, who was the most important Jew alive? Was it Rabbi Akiva? Maybe Rabbi Joshua? Maybe Rabban Gamliel? I did not say the greatest Jew alive. I said most important Jew alive. And I would venture to say that most of you, at least, have probably never heard of him before. His name was Tiberius Julius Alexander. Without a doubt, the most important Jew of his age, and actually one of the most prominent Jews in world military history. Tiberius Alexander was born in the 1st century, early, during the reign of the Roman Emperor Tiberius. The fact that he shares his name with the Roman emperor who ruled at the time of his birth says much about the allegiances of his family. This was a family who was wealthy and prominent in their city of Alexandria in Egypt. Alexandria, some of you might know, was for a long time a major center of Jewish life and learning. It is most famous as the city where the Bible was first translated into Greek, a version we know as the Septuagint, translated by the Jews of Alexandria. Tiberius's father was a leader in the Jewish community and a senior official, very respected by the Egyptian gentry. And we know of many business dealings that he had with senior officials in prominent Roman circles, including the emperor himself. But as much as this was a family that embraced Roman life, it seems that Alexander, that's Tiberius's father, that he was also a very proud and loyal Jew. We think that's the case because there was an Alexander from Alexandria who donated the gold and silver for the temple gates in Jerusalem. and there was only one man rich enough in Alexandria able to afford that. He was probably engaged in the sort of balancing act that many of us are familiar with in the conservative movement, balancing between demands of his Jewish allegiances and his allegiances to Roman culture, government, and society. Alexander wanted his sons to enter into the Roman bureaucracy. He wanted them to be successful on that path. He chose, therefore, to give them a Roman education rather than a traditional Jewish education. So Tiberius, his son, advanced on that path and rose through the ranks of the Roman bureaucracy just as his father had hoped. Eventually, he became an equestrian governor and general in the Roman Empire, very, very senior positions, particularly for a Jew. But when the historian Josephus introduces Tiberius Alexander, the first thing that he says about him is, I quote, "He did not remain in his ancestral customs," end quote. Unlike his father, it seems that Tiberius was not interested in balancing his Roman and Jewish identities. That's how he rose so high in the Roman bureaucracy. He didn't struggle. He was an apostate. He rejected Judaism in favor of the more cultured and worldly and sophisticated Roman way of life. Martin Goodman, who is the famous modern historian of Rome and Jerusalem, claims that the Roman elite totally ignored Tiberius's Jewish origins. He was treated as a Roman. Almost nobody even knew of his Jewish origins. But the story gets worse. In the first century, there were many, many conflicts that erupted between Jews and Romans, actually all over the Roman Empire, including in Alexandria. And at the time, Tiberius was prefect of Egypt, and he was the one who needed to address the clashes going on between the Romans and the Jews in his hometown. Tiberius unleashed atrocious violence against Alexandria's Jewish community. The Alexandrian Jewish community, centuries old, was basically decimated and totally destroyed by him. He was responsible for the murder of at least 50,000 Jewish men, women, and children. His soldiers were ordered to plunder their property and to burn their houses to the ground. And I'm still not done. Vespasian was so impressed by Tiberius's exterminating the Jews of Alexandria that he appointed him chief of staff and first advisor to Titus, the renowned military commander who was stationed in Jerusalem fighting the Jewish uprising there. As the war waged on, Tiberius found himself in a position of command against his former brothers on the Temple Mount itself. He unleashed the same violence against the Jews in Jerusalem that he unleashed in Alexandria. Some accounts say that he fought to preserve the temple so that it could be a shrine to history, But others actually dispute this and say that not only was Tiberius opposed to the existence of the Jewish people, he was opposed to all of Jewish civilization. It was innately inferior to Rome, and even the Jewish temple was deserving of destruction. Tiberius Julius Alexander, Yimach Shemo. What are we to make of this story? Is it ancient history? Is such brutal defection fathomable today? Could there be Jews alive in our time who turn so strongly against their heritage it could actually lead to bloodshed? I submit that maybe once I would equivocate before answering that question, but today I think the answer is yes, yes, yes. The story is fathomable, and there are Jews today who have turned away from Judaism so strongly that they even assist in the spilling of Jewish blood. Their project does not involve conquering the temple or converting Jews to a more civilized culture or religion. Their project is a divorcement from the state of Israel in the name of democracy and social justice. I am not talking here about Jews who criticize Israel. I'm not talking about those who ask hard questions about Israel, questions relating to peace and war, Jewish and democratic values, how we balance them, about proportionality and morality, legitimate questions that are about hugging and wrestling, giving Israel tough love sometimes. I'm not talking about those who criticize Israel for what it does or what it did. I'm talking about people who criticize Israel for what it is. Those who define Israel and are doing so today as a country that is inherently racist, that is shaped by the sins of colonialism and white supremacy. Anti-Zionist Jews. Anti-Zionist Jews are a small fraction of the Jewish community, but they are real and they are dangerous and they are growing in number. They have been surprisingly successful, thanks or no thanks to social media, in spreading their rhetoric. Just a couple of weeks ago, a poll of American Jews was published and found that 25% of the respondents agreed that Israel is an apartheid state. American Jews. 34% agreed that Israel's treatment of Palestinians is similar to racism in the United States. And 22% agreed that Israel is, quote, committing genocide against the Palestinians. Consider a recent statement issued by the Jewish law students studying at the City University of New York. The statement demanded, quote, a Palestinian right of return, a free and just Palestine from the river to the sea, and an end to the ongoing Nakba, end quote. Or consider that tomorrow, dozens of chavurot and progressive Jewish organizations, they will be fasting, but not for the destruction of Jerusalem. They'll be fasting to remember the Nakba against the Palestinian people. This is not criticism for what Israel did. It's criticism for what Israel is. It is a rhetoric that is beginning to dominate Jewish discourse in academia, publishing, media, and many professional organizations. It is even, sadly, the discourse in some corners of the liberal rabbinate. You may have heard that dozens of rabbinical students signed a letter so critical of Israel as missiles were raining down upon it just a couple of months ago that the dean of the American Jewish University, Rabbi Sachs's rabbinical school, asked his own students, "Where is your empathy?" Such a dramatic betrayal of what Jewish peoplehood means. Where is this all coming from? Well, anti-Zionist Jews have a mission not all that dissimilar from that of Tiberius Alexander. He wanted to be accepted in the elite of Roman military bureaucracy. Anti-Zionists also want acceptance. They also want legitimacy in progressive circles. And so to achieve that end, they not only denounce Israel for what it is, but offer a new kind of Judaism, a Judaism that is divorced from the state of Israel, divorced from Jewish peoplehood. It's a religion committed to tikkun olam and progressive Jewish values, period. This is not just an attack because it is historically, theologically, and logically ridiculous. It's also an attack because it seeks to delegitimize the ways the vast majority of Jews today understand Judaism and do Judaism. Zionism, you may know, was not a consensus belief in the Jewish community until the Holocaust. But then we and the whole world saw what happened when Jews don't have their own state. And look at the unprecedented and remarkable transformation that we have seen in the Jewish world since then. Today, Israel is home to the largest Jewish community in the world. It has one of the most advanced and prosperous economies in the world. It is the social, cultural, educational, and religious center of the Jewish people without question. In the United States, around 80% of American Jews still say that they support Israel as a Jewish state. In Canada, the number is 90%. There is nothing, absolutely nothing, that Jews agree on more than this point. Israel is still how Jews today do Jewish. And when Israel is under attack, like it was in May, by thousands of Hamas missiles raining down upon it, when Jewish schools are targeted, when its cities are overrun, when our soldiers are fired upon, our first instinct needs to be, my family is under attack. What can I do to show help, to support? That's what Rabbi Sachs's dean was talking about when he asked his students, where is your empathy? You want to be rabbis? We need respect. We need family bonds. We need a connection to one another. Anti-Zionist Jews had a different instinct. Their first instinct was to call Israel a center of Jewish supremacy, which is Nazi language. Their first instinct was to use words like apartheid state and Nakba. These are words that come straight from the Palestinian extremist vocabulary. It's the kind of betrayal that reminds me of Tiberius Alexander and the destruction of Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. It is Jews swimming in a sea that is poisoned with Jewish hate and that is tinged with too much Jewish blood. I know that there are lots of people who say we cannot turn our back on the next generation. Jews today are more progressive. We can't turn our back on them. They need to be part of the conversation. But to those people, I ask, who is turning their back on whom? Who is turning their back on whom? I wonder if there was anyone at the time of the temple's destruction that said, we have to try and include young Jews like Tiberius Alexander in the Jewish conversation. We should try giving him a seat at this table of the Sanhedrin so he can express his views. Progressive Jews in particular have to think carefully about these questions. Who gets to speak? Who gets a seat at the table? When is it criticism for what Israel did, and when is it criticism for what Israel is? My Jewish friends in the Green Party got a rude awakening about the difference between one and the other. They thought their party was doing the former, criticizing Israel for what it did. Not true. Now the whole country can see it for themselves. The Green Party is so woke, they are blind to their own vicious anti-Semitism. If there is loyalty, and there is empathy, and there is respect for Jewish peoplehood, we can talk about anything and debate everything. And we shouldn't be afraid of debate. We need more debate and conversation about Israel in our community, not less. Silencing and intimidating those who want to talk about Israel's problems, about Israel's challenges, about Israel's mistakes, we shouldn't silence those people. That would be a terrible mistake. Israel's a strong country. It can handle criticism. To silence its critics is just to push them away, to push away people who want a better state of Israel, not no state of Israel. But with those who want no Jewish homeland, who make war on Jewish peoplehood and its institutions, no offense. I just don't have anything to say to those people. We just don't have anything to talk about. There's no seat at this table. These are people whose views walk in the footsteps of Tiberius Alexander. They represent ideas and attitudes that destroyed the temple 2,000 years ago and seek to undermine and delegitimize the modern state of Israel today. And yes, that language, that rhetoric, those views kill Jews. I have said before that Tisha B'Av, in my mind, is the most relevant and unappreciated commemoration on the Jewish calendar today. Its themes beckon us to examine, to learn, to grow as individuals, but mostly as a people. Because as much as our tradition blames our enemies for the destruction of Jerusalem, it blames our own sins more. Blames our own failures. Sinat chinam, those who hate for no reason. Idolatry, disloyalty, disunity, and conflict. The Siddur says it bluntly, Mipnei chataenu galinu me'artzenu. Our own sins led to our exile. Today as well, there are those who seek to undo and to destroy, to sever and to replace what our people has built since overcoming the greatest slaughter the world had ever seen. The state of Israel is a modern-day miracle that ensures our safety and our survival into the future, and it was established on the principle of Jewish peoplehood. It is foundational, the homeland for the Jewish people. And tonight I will weep for those who destroyed the temple 2,000 years ago, but also for those who have divorced themselves from the principles of Jewish peoplehood today. May tonight's fast awaken us all and awaken the heavens to the sorrows of yesterday and the tragedies of today. May it bring us comfort and healing and restoration, and may it bring nearer the day when all will rejoice in a redeemed Jerusalem, resplendent with love, with peace, and with a united Jewish people. Shabbat Shalom.